And now here the Buddha gets into something interesting, both eternalism and non-eternalism. He says there are some wanderers and priests who are partly eternalists and partly non-eternalists, who proclaim the partial eternity and the partial non-eternity of the self and the world in four ways. On what grounds? And I'm going to read part of this one because it appears elsewhere in this collection of texts. It's the Buddhist creation story. There comes a time, monks, sooner or later, after a long period, when this world contracts. At a time of contraction, beings are mostly reborn in the Abhisara Brahma world, and there they dwell mind-made, feeding on delight, self-luminous, moving through the air, glorious, and they stay like that for a long time. But the time comes sooner or later after a long period when this world begins to expand. In this expanding world, an empty palace of Brahma appears. So this reminds me a lot of what I've been reading about this multiverse theory. So some universe, after expanding, contracts. And then there is another expansion. And this is the Brahma Palace, the new universe. And then one being, from exhaustion of the lifespan or of merits, falls from the Abhisara world, which may be something like the modern singularity, or whatever is beyond that in the grand multiversal scheme. I think I've seen it called Hilbert space. So for whatever reason, svabhava, this notion, this feeling of self-beingness, emerges in this Brahma palace, into this new universe. So it falls into this new universe, and there it dwells, mind-made, feeding on delight, self-luminous, moving through the air, glorious, and it stays like that for a long time. Then, in this being who has been alone for so long, there arises unrest, discontent, and worry. And it thinks, oh, if only some other beings would come here. And other beings then, from exhaustion of their lifespan, or of their merits, so due to their own karma, they fall from the Abhisara world as well, and arise in the same Brahma palace as companions for this being. And there they dwell mind-made, and they stay like that for a long time. And then, monks, that being who first arose there thinks, I am Brahma, the great Brahma, the conqueror, the unconquered, the all-seeing, the all-powerful, the Lord, the maker and creator, ruler and orderer, Father of all that have been and shall be. These beings were created by me. How so? Because I first had this thought. Oh, if only some other beings would come here. That was my wish, and then these beings came into this existence, this new universe, this new Brahma palace. But those beings who arose subsequently think, this, friends, the first being, Brahma, is the great Brahma, the conqueror, the unconquered, the all-seeing, the all-powerful, the Lord, the maker and creator, ruler, appointer and orderer, Father of all that have been and shall be. How so? We have seen that he was here first, and that we arose after him. So the first being thinks, I'm lonely. As soon as he thinks I'm lonely, other beings begin to fall out of the Abhisara Brahma realm, and he believes that he created them with his wish. Also, the beings that begin to arise after him all think he is the Lord, the all-conqueror, blah blah blah. This notion that's being described here is similar in many ways to modern notions about God as creator God. It's interesting to see the Buddha here address this idea. So he recontextualizes it. He says, this Brahma palace, this universe, is only one of many expanding and contracting multiverses. For a time, beings dwell in this great abhasara realm of light, self-luminous, feeding on delight, consciousness in the singularity. And then it begins to expand, and form emerges, beings emerge. The first being seems to be all-powerful. Other beings believe that the first being was the creator. But the Buddha is teaching that this is not so. These other beings have arisen due to the law of causation in conventional reality. Karma, action, each individual mind continuum within the ocean of great mind has its own unique course. These other beings appeared due to their own karma, not because of the wish of the Creator. So here the Buddha is addressing notions popular in his time, but he's also addressing notions popular today. So there is a creation story within Buddhism, but it's not really a creation story. It's a story of an infinitely expanding and contracting multiverse. So he describes a few more ways in which people will fall into the view of partial eternity, partial non-eternity. And he says what he says at the end of each description section. He says, these are the 4 ways in which these wanderers and priests are partly eternalists and partly non-eternalists. Whatever wanderers and priests proclaim the partial eternity and the partial non-eternity of the self and the world, they do so on one or other of these 4 grounds. There is no other way. This the Tathagata understands. These viewpoints thus grasped and adhered to will lead to such and such destinations in another world. Somewhere else in samsara, the infinite loop will keep looping if we hold to such views. It's not true gnosis. So he knows and he understands, but he is not attached to that knowledge, and being thus unattached, he has experienced for himself perfect peace. And having truly understood the arising and passing away of feelings, their attraction and peril, and the deliverance from them, the Tathagata is liberated without remainder. So he doesn't fall into any of these kinds of partial eternity, partial non-eternity views, and he is peaceful. He understands, but he doesn't cling to that understanding. Now he gets into something else. He starts talking about the wanderers and priests who are finitists and infinitists, who proclaim the finitude and infinitude of the world on 4 grounds. What are they? Well, I'm not going to read them all. I'm going to encourage you to get the sutta and read them for yourself. But again, he says, these are 4 ways in which these wanderers and priests are finitists and infinitists, and proclaim the finitude and infinitude of the world on 4 grounds. There is no other way. This, monks, the Tathagata understands. These viewpoints thus grasped and adhered to will lead to such and such destination in another world. But again he says, these, monks, are those other matters, profound, hard to see, hard to understand, peaceful, excellent, beyond mere thought, subtle, to be experienced by the wise, which the Tathagata, having realized them by his own super-knowledge, proclaims, and about which those who would truthfully praise the Tathagata would rightly speak. So those who would truthfully praise the Tathagata praise him for dismantling wrong views. And then the Buddha moves into another interesting topic. He says there are some wanderers and priests who are eel-wrigglers. When asked about this or that matter, they resort to evasive statements, and they wriggle like eels on four grounds. What are they? And I think I'm actually going to read this section because it is interesting, because when we read from the big old Buddhist canon, the ocean of teachings from all the various branches, there are occasions where it would seem that the Buddha is being like an eel wriggler. And so I want to look deeper into what this section is describing. So he says, in the first case, there is a wanderer or priest who does not know in truth whether a thing is wholesome or unwholesome. He thinks, I do not in truth know whether this is good or whether it is bad. Not knowing which is right, I might declare, that is good, or that is bad, and that might be a lie, and that would distress me. And if I were distressed, that would be a hindrance to me. Thus, fearing to lie, abhorring to lie, he does not declare a thing to be good or bad. But when asked about this or that matter, he resorts to evasive statements and wriggles like an eel. I don't say this, I don't say that, I don't say it is otherwise, I don't say it is not. I don't not say it is not. This is the first case. So we see here that this person hasn't discerned whether or not a thing is wholesome. And they're afraid of lying because they don't know. And so they won't say. They wriggle out of it. They say, I don't say it is, I don't say it is not, I don't say it is otherwise, blah blah blah. The difference between this person and a Buddha when he engages in similar kind of discourse is that the Buddha does know whether a thing is wholesome or unwholesome. But sometimes he chooses not to engage a question. There are 14 such questions in which he doesn't respond, which to some might seem like eel wriggling. But this person's eel wriggling is based on fear. He won't declare a thing to be good or bad. He resorts to evasive statements and wriggles like an eel. The Buddha is different. The second kind of eel wriggler is similar, but instead of worrying about lying, this person is afraid that if he declares that is good or that is bad, he might fall into desire or lust or hatred or aversion. And he thinks, if I felt desire, lust, hatred, or aversion, that would be attachment on my part. If I felt attachment, that would distress me. And if I were distressed, that would be a hindrance to me. Thus, fearing attachment, abhorring attachment, he resorts to evasive statements. This is the second case. So in the first case, the person is worried about the negative consequences of lying. And now in the second case, the person is an eel wriggler, because they're afraid that if they give a definitive answer, they will fall into desire, lust, hatred, or aversion, and that would be attachment. So this person fears attachment. And again, the Buddha doesn't have such fears, although he does sometimes give evasive statements. But these evasive statements coming from the Buddha are usually in response to a person's lack of the ability to understand what he might say, or the Buddha might think such an answer is not conducive to the cessation of suffering, and so he won't answer it. And the third kind of eel wriggler is similar. This person doesn't know, but instead of being afraid of the negative consequences of lying or of falling into attachment, this person is afraid that some skillful debater might come and reveal their ignorance. And the fourth kind of eel wriggler is said to be dull and stupid. It's kind of funny, but because of his dullness and stupidity, when he is questioned, he resorts to evasive statements and wriggles like an eel. If you ask me whether there is another world, if I thought so, I would say there is another world. But I don't say so. And I don't say otherwise. And I don't say it is not. And I don't not say it is not. So here we see the four kinds of negations. I don't say yes, I don't say no. I don't say both, I don't say neither. Is there no other world? Is there both another world and no other world? Is there neither another world nor no other world? Are there spontaneously born beings? Are there not? Both, neither? Does the Tathagata exist after death? Does he not exist after death? Does he both exist and not exist after death? Does he neither exist nor not exist after death? This eel wriggler says, if I thought so, I would say so. But I don't say it is, I don't say it isn't. I don't say it is and isn't, and I don't say it is neither is nor isn't. So some of these topics the Buddha also avoided, but he avoided them for a different reason. Not because of dullness and stupidity, but because the answers to these questions would not have helped the questioner to dismantle suffering. So that is the end of the eel wriggler section. He says, these are the four ways in which those wanderers and priests who are eel wrigglers resort to evasive statements. There is no other way. This, monks, the Tathagata understands. These viewpoints thus grasped and adhered to will lead to such and such destinations in another world. So it's interesting again how he emphasizes that it's not just that they're wrong, it's that holding on to these views will produce a rebirth somewhere else in the big infinite loop, samsara. So he understands what they're saying, but he's not attached to that understanding. And these monks are the other matters profound, hard to see, which the Tathagata, having realized them by his own superknowledge, proclaims, and about which those who would truthfully praise the Tathagata would rightly speak. We praise him because he dismantles all these wrong views. In dismantling all the wrong views, we catch glimpses of right view. And now this next section is super interesting to me because it sounds a lot like the modern materialist answer to questions about reality. the modern materialist worldview, these people are chance originists. There are monks, some wanderers and priests, who are chance originists, and who proclaim the chance origin of the self and the world on two grounds. What are they? So, a chance originist would basically deny the law of causation, karma. This chance originist would say, there are monks, certain devas called unconscious. As soon as oh no, this isn't the wrong view itself, this is the Buddha describing the wrong view. There are monks, certain devas called unconscious. As soon as a perception arises in them, those devas fall from that realm. And it may happen that a being falls from that realm and arises in this world. So a deva, some kind of wild celestial being, exists in this realm called unconscious. So there's no form to perceive. There's no vijnana. There's nothing to remember. And then this being, this mind continuum, coursing through samsara, finds its way to the human world. And it may happen that a being falls from that realm and arises in this world. He recalls his last existence, but none before that. And his last existence, remember, was from the unconscious realm. He thinks, the self and the world have arisen by chance. How so? Before this I did not exist. Now, from not being, I have been brought to being. This is the first case. So, here we encounter a dualistic discrimination of being and not being. This being perceives not being because it was dwelling in the realm of devas called unconscious, and now it doesn't remember anything prior to that, and it comes here as a human and remembers unconsciousness, and it says it's not able to connect any dots. It's not able to apply the law of causation and understand, and so it proclaims a chance origination. And then there is a second case where a wanderer or priest is a logician. So again, similar to modern materialistic worldview. This person hammers out his own opinion and declares, the self and the world have arisen by chance. That's the second case. They are logicians. They think they know. Those are the two ways in which those wanderers and priests who are chance originists proclaim the chance origin of the self and the world. There is no other way. So either they rely on their memory of rebirth from the unconscious realm, nothingness, the notion of non-being to being, or they are engaged in intense dualistic discrimination. They are logicians, and they also see the chance origin of self and world. And now the Buddha says again, this I understand, but I don't cling to the understanding. I'm peaceful, I got insight, so I'm not worried. But I see that these beings, if they hold to such a view, will be born somewhere else in the infinite loop. These monks are those other matters, profound, hard to see, which the Tathagata, having realized them by his own supergnosis, proclaims, and about which those who would truthfully praise the Tathagata would speak. So we got to remember the beginning of the story. At first the Buddha outlined all the reasons that worldly people praise the Buddha, but now in this section we're seeing how the Buddha dismantles wrong view, and he repeatedly tells us this is why we praise the Buddha, because he destroys the assumptions of dualistic discrimination about the self in the world in the past, present, or future as eternal or non-eternal, or both eternal and non-eternal, or neither eternal nor non-eternal, or real or not real, or both real and unreal, or neither unreal nor real. This is the great negation. It is really helpful to understand what Buddhist teachers have called the two truths. We have this conventional truth. Here I am, saying words. There you are, perceiving them. This particular instance of the multiverse. That is the conventional view, the samsaric mind. But ultimately, things are not as they seem. Ultimately, things are beyond thoughts, words, and stories. It's subtle, beyond the sphere of reasoning, to be experienced by the wise. And this is the heart of why we praise the Buddha. So then, he talks about some wanderers and priests who are speculators about the future. They have fixed views about the future, and they put forth various theories about the future. And how do they do so? They declare that the self after death is healthy and conscious, and material, or immaterial, or both material and immaterial, or neither material nor immaterial, finite, infinite, both, neither, of uniform perception, of varied perception, of limited perception, of unlimited perception, or they are wholly happy, or wholly miserable, both or neither. So extensive use of the four negations again. These four negations, I think, are really popularized by Nagarjuna, but they're there in the beginning. So these are the 16 ways in which these ascetics and priests proclaim a doctrine of consciousness after death. There is no other way. And the Buddha also often speaks about a kind of consciousness after death, but it's more of a continuation. It's not as if there is a permanent and isolated individual taking reincarnation. The Buddha often speaks about rebirth. He talks about his own past lives, and at the end of the stories he says, yes, that was me and no other, but I view it as a kind of current in an ocean. The current is the ocean. There are many currents in the ocean. The current has an individual type of existence, but it really is nothing more than energy moving through the ocean. So this is speculation about life after death, and he points out how these wanderers and priests view the after-death state. He says these are the 16 ways in which these wanderers and priests proclaim a doctrine of conscious post-mortem survival. There is no other way. This the Tathagata understands. He understands their positions, but he doesn't cling to that understanding. He sees beyond. These, monks, are those other matters, profound, hard to see, which the Tathagata, having realized them by his own supergnosis, proclaims, and about which those who would truthfully praise the Tathagata would rightly speak. So we can take these one by one. Some declare that after death we are material, or we are immaterial, or we are both material and immaterial. So the problem with this is that the notions material and immaterial are already illusory. Why would we project this illusion into future rebirths if we have understanding. If we have gnosis, we know already that the true nature, one mind, Buddha nature, is beyond material and immaterial, both or neither. And then he says that after death we are finite or infinite or both or neither. Again, from our deep gnosis heart, we know that these notions of infinite and finite, both and neither, are just more views, just more aspects of dualistic discrimination. Then he talks about in the future after death that we have uniform perception, so all beings have one perception after death, or varied perception, or both, or limited perception, or unlimited perception. So that was wrong. I misspoke. So there's either uniform perception, varied perception, limited perception, or unlimited perception. So again, we can look at our current situation here now. We all have perception that is both varied and uniform, both limited and unlimited. It depends on the state of mind and the ability of the yogi to extend that mind. And there's all sorts of fun ESP evidence that suggests there is such a thing as like shared perception, but there's also obviously limited and unique perception. So again, after death, it will be like it is now, beyond views. And the last two, he says, after death, these people say we will be wholly happy, or wholly miserable, or both and neither. Again, we can look at our current situation. Has there ever been a time, or have you ever met a being who is always happy? Or have you met a being who is always miserable? In the future, in the next rebirths, it will be the same. There will be happy times, there will be sad times. But happy times only exist because there are sad times. Sad times only exist because there are happy times. This is just how the mind system works. I think this is as much as I'm going to talk about today. There is more to explore, although we are getting close to the end. But this one's getting kind of long. So I'm going to end this here. Thank you for listening. I appreciate having friends like you who cherish these teachings.